Hey there, welcome back. It's another day, a few days after I started showing you what's going on with the vacuum system here on this AMC 360. It snowed, it rained, now I'm back outside, the weather's pretty nice. And today I'm going to finish up doing the vacuum lines, and just as a sample of what this job entails, I'm going to be showing you the connections for the Distributor Vacuum Advanced System. Over here, I think it's in your range of vision, is the Vacuum Advanced canister for the Distributor. It runs off of two vacuum sources. On the side of the carburetor over here, on the passenger side of the carburetor, there is a ported manifold vacuum source, and here, shared with the power booster vacuum fitting, is a port for full manifold vacuum. It goes through the low temperature CTO, the yellow one here, and through the high temperature CTO, shown here, the red one on the water, the thermostat neck. So, here is the old system. All the lines that were disconnected, and so what I'm going to do, I'm going to disassemble this, put these fittings on the vacuum, the CTO valves, and then run new lines according to the factory wiring or vacuum schematic, which, as I pointed out earlier, my truck no longer has a copy of on the front core support. These vacuum lines have been on here a long time. They've hardened, they're sticking to this brittle plastic. I don't want to buy new plastic fittings, though they are available. I just don't want to buy them if I don't have to. So I'm going to disconnect them. I've made a little slit, as you can see. As you can see right there, I made a little slit in the end of each of them. So to get them off, just put a little screwdriver in there, give it a twist, and gently twist it off of the vacuum fitting. This little fitting here that goes on the CTO, it has holes that accept these vacuum T's or elbows or straight connectors. So I'm just going to put that on here in the direction it has to go. Slightly interferes with the fuel line here. Not much you can do about that. You can rotate this slightly, but then it interferes with the return line for the fuel. Okay, so that's on there. This one, this fitting here, goes on the yellow low temperature CTO. And I forgot to slit this hose. So gently, you don't want to cut into the plastic connector here. Just want to slit the hose enough right up to the end so you can pry it apart, loosen the tension it has on your vacuum, the old vacuum hose. And now I'm going to connect this to the CTO switch down here, right down here, like this. And it has a series of connectors that are going to go to various places. One of them is going to go over to the high temp CTO. One of them is going to go to the non-linear relay valve. This valve here that shows up on the diagram right here, what that does is regulates ported vacuum between ported and manifold vacuum, so your distributor is always seeing at least 7 inches of vacuum for advance. Complicated system, but it's necessary. Alright, so I'm going to disconnect the hoses from the CTO, from this non-linear relay valve. And it doesn't attach to anything in particular. It just sits there in the top of the intake manifold connected to these hoses. Sometimes these vacuum hoses do not want to give up their grip. There's a little lip here that the vacuum hose fits over. Sometimes, if you haven't sliced past that point, it's not going to come off. There we go, that's off. That's off. I forgot to slit that one as well. So you get to see this marvelous operation in action. And if you just slit a short pipe like this, you can just slit the whole hose so that it comes off easily. You don't want to put a lot of pressure on these plastic connectors. They're not very strong. All right. Oh, and one final item. This is a delay valve. It's listed there as number 12 on the diagram. It is going to go in line between the low temp CTO and the high temp CTO, so that the vacuum doesn't hit real hard, I guess. Alright, and that also, this line here has a Y that fed the air injection reactor pump, no longer in the system. So I'll change out this connector for a straight connector. And that's on there pretty darn good. You can push it back a bit to kind of break that seal. If you can see that, if you can break the seal a little bit, it makes it easier for that piece to come out. One other thing you can do, get a very small pick or screwdriver, get it going down. You don't want to enlarge this vacuum fitting too much. Just want to break the seal. Oh, that's the wrong one. There we go. That's the one I want. Just break the seal between it and the connector. You can break enough of that, get it twisting. And I don't want to twist this vacuum connector off. Maybe it's time to get the little hose pliers I mentioned earlier. Hold on to it, grip that so I can twist that plastic connector out of there. I'd like not to have to run a cap on a Y there if it's not necessary. So here we go. Grip that rubber connector, and what I'm just trying to do is to get it to twist on that fitting. Just to wiggle it back and forth. People who've done this before kind of forget what it's like the first time you're trying to get one of these off and you don't know what is holding that thing on. Well, it's still stuck on there. Time for a pick. A set of picks are very handy to have in the garage for reasons you have not yet dreamed of. For this point, or this purpose, all I'm doing is pushing it far enough between the hose and the connector to break that seal, to break that bond that has developed in the 33 years of these two parts being together here on this truck under the hood in high heat. And there we go. It's turning. Now I hold on to the hose below where that little ridge on the nipple is in that plastic and gently twist it out, because I need to put another one on, another straight fitting on there. So that's the way vacuum hoses connect to these molded vacuum connectors in what they call the vacuum harness. Okay, there we go. So that nonlinear relay valve, now look at that. It looks like it looks like I didn't have to remove that after all. Oh no, it did. I did. You see that line right there going off to the air pump? I don't need any more. That line I just removed, that Y goes to the manifold vacuum. So that's going to sit down here on the intake, right about there. Right about there. Can you see that? I don't know if you can see that. Right next to the, right underneath the fuel filter, basically. Alright, you can't see that. Trust me, that's where it sits. A little pocket there. Now, got to get a straight fitting. Where do I have a straight fitting? In all the butchering that was done on this truck, one straight fitting was left over after I undid all the things that previous owners have done. So let's start with that. I'm going to put that into the vacuum harness. It has a little shoulder that keeps it from going in too far. That's going to sit down here, and I need a length of hose. How long? I need a length of hose about 3-4 inches. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect this 5/32 hose. It's going to be the best fitting, the tightest fitting on these vacuum connectors. And once I put this on here, it's not going to want to come off. You could use a 3/8 vacuum hose on this. It would probably be tight enough, but 5/32 definitely is tight enough. So that sits over there, and I've got my hose right about, where am I going to cut it? Right about there. Right about there. Get my hose cutter, put that in there. It's a ratcheting hose cutter. Makes a nice, clean, square cut, or squarish cut, better than I could do with a utility knife or a pair of scissors or angle cutters. So that's going to go right there. I'm not going to hook it up yet. I'm not going to hook it up yet because it's a lot easier to connect these hoses. Connect these hoses by doing them up here rather than down there. All right, next fitting. Next fitting. Nonlinear relay valve has two outer ports. See the outer ports? Which do those go to? It doesn't say. It doesn't say on this one. But it looks like in this diagram, you see how it's upright? It's a little distorted version of that. It's upright, so that upper hose goes through the delay valve to the low temp CTO, the upper port on the low temp CTO. Yeah, it's going to provide the feed for the ported vacuum. So, let's confirm this on our other iPad diagram. I don't want to have to cut this apart again. Yep. Here's the diagram I showed you earlier, and there you can clearly see the nonlinear relay valve. There is a it's called a reverse delay valve there. From the top of that all the way over to the top of the low temp CTO. So let's keep this over here so I don't have to keep turning it back on. I don't like working with dirty stuff. My hands get real dirty with all the grease and soot and the plastic breaking down. So, from that relay valve, from the top over to the top of the CTO, the low temp yellow CTO, with a delay valve, a reverse delay valve, installed opposite of what it normally would be. That's why they call it a reverse delay valve. Nothing in it is backwards, it's just you use it backwards of the way it's designed. So, normally these have marks on them. Not sure if you can see it, but this says distributor or dist. This says vacuum. Normally it would go, the vacuum would go to your ported or manifold vacuum source, and this nipple would go to the distributor. The way this is working, it's not, neither of these is going directly to a vacuum source or to a distributor. They're going between the nonlinear relay valve and the low temp CTO. So let's put that in there. It's going to be very short lines. This is going to be right there. And I'm not sure if you can see this. I'll just give you it's hard to get an overhead view of this. Maybe I'll try to configure this, clamp the camera onto something so you can look straight down at what's going on here. Okay, here we are looking down at the front of the intake manifold of my AMC 360 in my 1987 Jeep J-20. See the carburetor right here, the fuel line, the return line, the thermostat water neck, the oil fill tube. You should be able to see right under here there is a vacuum fitting. That is the source for manifold vacuum. You can't see it, but just at the tip of my finger, just underneath this little shield, is a ported vacuum source. Spark is going to get switched between ported vacuum and manifold vacuum, depending on the temperature of the engine and so forth. It all winds up between those two ports, coming down to the distributor right here, and the vacuum advance nipple. Also in the system are two other components. The nonlinear relay valve, which sits right here. This adjusts vacuum. It meters out between ported and manifold vacuum so that your distributor is always seeing at least 7 inches of vacuum. One other final item. Where did that go? Right here. The delay valve that sits in line between the low temp CTO and the nonlinear relay valve. And that's it. Now I've got to just run the lines as the factory designated them so that the distributor is actually seeing vacuum that is suited to the conditions of the engine. The first thing I want to do is connect this nonlinear relay valve to the various ports it goes to. That goes there. The top port on it goes to the top port on the yellow CTO with the delay valve in between. And the delay valves are designated by their color. The colored section is usually specified to go in a particular direction. The colored on this goes to the low temp CTO top port. So that's all I'm going to be doing. connecting this to there with a hose, and then connecting that other end to there with a hose. Let's do it. So what I'm going to do is slip a piece of my 5/32 hose onto this fitting, put it where it's going to sit, and you can see why it's easier to not connect this fitting, this hose to the source, the manifold source, at this moment. This white side goes towards the nonlinear relay valve. I want it to sit about right there, so I want to cut this hose right about here. Right about there. It doesn't have to be within a millimeter, but you want it in the general vicinity that is going to allow your hose to reach, to be flexible if need be. Alright, and the white side goes toward the nonlinear relay valve. Alright. Once I push this on, it's going to be on there pretty firmly, so I don't want to have to try to remove it. Now I need just a length. See, that hose is going to go there. I need a very short length, but what I'll do, make sure it's the proper length. Put that nonlinear relay valve back into its position. Line up that manifold, the tube to the ported manifold vacuum source, the hose I should say, where it's going to sit, and then this is going to go to right there on the top. That's where I'm going to cut it. I may have said earlier what each of these things does, but if not, I'll review it here. Manifold vacuum is always going to have vacuum provided from it. It's from a source below the throttle valves. If there's vacuum in the engine, it's going to be showing at the manifold vacuum port. Ported vacuum is from a source above the throttle valves. Above the throttle valves, before they're open, there's very little vacuum signal. Once those throttle valves open, the vacuum signal to the ported ports increases. Distributors usually run off manifold vacuum. In the olden days, that's where they all ran. All right, I'm going to put this piece of hose here. Actually, and since I have the luxury of space, I'm going to take it off, push it on gently. You want it to get at least past that ridge, and you can see the ridge there in the hose. There we go. That is firmly attached. Okay, so that's going to sit down over there. Back to what all these switches and valves do. Actually, this engine usually, when it's up to temperature, runs off ported vacuum. So you could run a line right from the ported vacuum right to the distributor with no delay valves, no switches or anything, and it would run pretty well. But under certain conditions, it's advantageous for there to be more vacuum advance at idle. One instance is when the engine is warming up. So, when the engine is warming up, this switch right here, the low temp CTO, is going to provide manifold vacuum to the distributor. That's going to raise your idle speed and help your engine warm up quicker. Alright, where are we now? We're on to the lower port of that CTO. There we go. The lower port. The lower port goes to that ported manifold vacuum source, and the other end goes to the lower port of the nonlinear relay valve. So there's going to be two lines going between the nonlinear relay valve and the low temp CTO. One of them is going to come from the top through the reverse delay valve to that top port on the CTO harness connector. The other one is going to go from this port here to that, this bottom port. You can see they're in a row, 1, 2, 3. This port to that port. I don't have to have these on the engine in order to cut those hoses. Just do it without my back bending over. Younger guys watching this, no fun getting old. All right. So that's going to go from the nonlinear relay valve there to the bottom port. Where's that going to end up? It's going to end up right there. It's going to be a pretty nifty vacuum harness. Right there is going to be where I cut. All right. Connect that up. And that is that. Now, the output of this valve here is going to go over to the high temp CTO. For that I need there we go. I see what's going on here. I'm going to have to add a T to this line because one of those, this manifold is going to go right to the high temp CTO. Manifold vacuum is going to go right to the high temp CTO. Let's plug this in. And where on that high temp CTO is manifold vacuum going? It's going to the lowest port. This port right down here. So I need to put a T in this line going to that port. It's going to be very short. That's fine. We can do that. In fact, remember that Y fitting I took out earlier? No, I don't want that. I want a T fitting. I want a T fitting because that is just about, that port of the nonlinear relay valve is just about underneath that CTO bottom port. That's the middle port to the nonlinear relay valve. It's going to go into there. So you see now, I'm going to have manifold vacuum going into here to provide one signal for the nonlinear relay valve to switch from. It's also going to have ported vacuum coming from here, and it's going to meter between the two to always have at least 7 inches of vacuum coming out of here to provide a vacuum source for the low temp CTO, so that when it switches from ported vacuum, it's always going to have some signal over here. All right. That's the way they run it. That's the way I'm going to do it. I don't have a good reason to change that. One thing to note, on the diagrams, the locations of these T's are more conceptual than actual. They're going to put a location for the T in the line somewhere, but not exactly in the line where it would be located. You have to put the T where it's most convenient to route the vacuum where it needs to go. So this T can be right, it might on the schematic show up further down the line, but it's nice to have it right here because then when this is in place, when this low temp CTO is plugged in, this high temp CTO, this high temp CTO is going to be fed by a very, very, very short length of tubing. All right, only got a couple more things to hook up. So let's hook up that high temp CTO fitting to the nonlinear relay valve with a very short piece of tubing. And I have this fitting on here, this short piece I used earlier. I'm not going to even try to reuse that. Sometimes there's just attrition. Not much you can do about it. Actually, here's one thing I can do about it. I can use that length of tubing to connect, or a portion of it, to connect between the high temp CTO and that T-fitting for manifold vacuum to the nonlinear relay valve. So let's see, how much space do I have to give it? Not much. I just want to be a little accurate on this one. It might be more than it initially appears. I don't want to have to cut this twice. Alright. Let's put this on that. One thing I might do, yeah, see this fitting is almost in the way of that fuel line. It's kind of hard to release it. This fitting is a pipe thread fitting, and you can tighten it down just a little bit more to rotate the outputs of that. There we go. So it's not going to be as in the way as it might otherwise have been. Okay. So that nonlinear relay valve is going to be fed or connected at the T to the high temp CTO right there. And where do I need that? Where do I need that to make that cut? Let's just mark it with a Sharpie. Somewhere over here. Okay. So let's take this off. There's my mark with the Sharpie. To make the cut on that mark. And that is going to connect to the T-fitting, providing manifold vacuum to both my nonlinear relay valve and also to the high temp CTO. Because on the high temp CTO, there are times when, in a heavy-duty application, that's what they called it, the heavy-duty cooling option, manifold vacuum is going to be sent to the distributor when the engine gets above 220 degrees. You think to yourself, why do you want full manifold vacuum when the engine coolant temperature is at 220 degrees? Well, it's not overheating yet, but it might be on its way. When you bump up, when you increase vacuum advance to the distributor, you have increased idle speed. Increased idle speed is going to turn the fan, the cooling fan, quicker. A quicker turning cooling fan is going to cool the engine down, perhaps. It is kind of a last-ditch effort, but that's what they do. The high temp cooling, the heavy-duty cooling system has a high temp CTO that switches from ported vacuum to manifold vacuum above 220 degrees. It kicks up the idle speed and hopefully cools your engine off. Alright, we're almost done here. I've got to connect the nonlinear relay valve T to manifold. I've got to connect the output of the low temp CTO to the input of the high temp CTO, the upper input there. And then I have to connect this T-fitting here to the ported vacuum source on the side of the carburetor. Now, let's see. That top port of the high temp CTO goes to the middle, the output port of the low temp CTO. It's going to be easiest if I put the vacuum fitting, the vacuum hose first on the low temp CTO, then cut it to length for the high temp CTO. Okay. Slide everything back into place. connect the vacuum harness connectors to the CTO. This is much easier than running individual hoses to each of these positions. Alright, so where does that want to go? That wants to go kind of above that fitting there and right to there. Right to there. Easy enough. Put the blade up so you can see it cutting. There we go. And it's going to be easier for me to make that connection with this removed. That's going to be like that, that's going to be like that. You don't really want to twist in the vacuum hoses. They'll accommodate a good deal of twist. If you don't have to, don't. Okay, that is that. Now, this line goes off to the distributor. I'm going to do that one last because I can always attach it here and then run the length I need. This line goes to the ported vacuum source. This line goes to the manifold vacuum source. Let's first do this one. Then I'll put it into, actually no. Let's get this one cut first. Because once I have it in place, once I connect that manifold vacuum source, I'm not going to want to disconnect it again because it's going to fit on that fitting pretty tight. Whereas this one, this hose, is just going to go up to there. It's got a lot of play. It can be here, it could be there, it could be there. So it doesn't have to be millimeter precise. I can put it right there and hook it up after. Cut it now, hook it up after. There we go. So when time comes, I'll push that onto the manifold, the ported vacuum fitting there. Now, the last fitting to connect to the manifold fitting, and then once I cut that to length, I will slide what I've got left of my hose over the output of the high temp CTO, which goes to the distributor, and then cut that to length. So we're going to push this vacuum fitting, this T, onto the vacuum hose. Now, if you think, hey, well, don't you have to disconnect these things in order to cut the vacuum to the distributor? Well, that is something you have to do for tune-ups. Disconnect the vacuum. You can do that one of two ways. You can use just a clamp to clamp off the vacuum hose going to the distributor. Another thing you can do is just disconnect it at the distributor. Once these high temp and low temp CTO switches are connected and in the system, you can remove these vacuum harnesses, the vacuum harness connectors, easily enough. You don't want to be removing these vacuum hoses on a regular basis, so it's fine if they're really hard to remove. Not a bad thing at all. Okay, so my hose is right there. I see how much length I need to reach my manifold source. Going to just mark it, cut it, put everything back in after I hook up the distributor line to the center port of that high temp CTO, and then gotta be done. Sometimes it's hard to get a nice clean cut with these very small hoses on one of those hose cutters. Although when you can do it, it's really nice. Alright, that's it. That's my completed vacuum harness. All rebuilt, fresh hoses, everything installed where it should be the right way. I'm going to slide it into place. Connect this line to that manifold vacuum source. I'm going to push it on using my little hose pliers. Wiggle it on good and tight. Okay, here we are. I got you a better shot of what's going on here with the distributor. Here is the line, the vacuum line, coming from the middle output port of the CTO, the high temp CTO. This is the vacuum nipple it has to attach to. I could loop this around, but then it gets closer to the engine pulley. It's easier if I just use this thing I just dropped, a little angle connector. Will sit right on that port there and give a straight connection to the hose. One thing I just noticed gives me another opportunity to buy more parts for this truck. Something I've never in all my life seen. I've been working on cars since the early 1980s, and I have never seen, see that little dark spot right there on this nipple? That is a rust hole that this plow truck has developed on its vacuum advance nipple. So, that's not a big deal. Take off those two screws, disconnect it inside, pull it off, and put it back on. So it is not going to be hard to replace that. It's a little annoying, but I've replaced enough on this already. I'm used to it. Hopefully, until then, the vacuum hose here will cover that hole and it won't be leaking vacuum. So where should I cut this? I should cut it. Let's get that Sharpie. I should cut it right about there would be good. Now actually, I want to leave some space for adjusting the distributor because the distributor has to be rotated. It has to be rotated to adjust the timing. So if I have to rotate it, I don't want to stretch out that hose. So let's get a little extra play in there. Let's pull that back a little bit because there is plenty of space. Let's cut it right there. Okay. Right. Connect up my fitting. Oop. Drop my light. Hook it on my power steering hose. Push the vacuum line onto that 90-degree fitting. There we go. And push that fitting all the way on. All the way on. Cover up that vacuum hole, the hole in the vacuum nipple, until I can get a replacement. I'll get one when I get one. All right. That is it. Just put everything back together, start it up, and then I can give the engine a tune-up. I didn't want to give a tune-up with a vacuum leak or with misadjusted or misdirected vacuum advance lines. Now everything's where it should be. There should be no problem tuning this engine properly. All right, that's the job. That's what it takes to replace vacuum lines on an old truck like this. Not specific to Jeeps, but very common with Jeeps, I'll tell you that much. All right, have a great day. Good luck working on your own truck. Bye now.